I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. Before we get to this edition of the show, I just want to promote Wall Street Window, a website maintained by Mike Swanson that provides valuable insights on both financial markets and geopolitics. It's been around since 2003, and its slogan is "Be in the Know," and I highly recommend it as daily reading. So go on over to wallstreetwindow.com and keep yourself informed. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Gunnar, Mark, Alexander, Catherine, Tilo, Emilia, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Chance, Chase, Dan, David H., Y. Kellerman, Sadeed 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. On this edition of the show, after a long absence, we welcome back to the program journalist Albert Lanier, who you may remember from a number of episodes we've done on true crime cases and politics. But in a previous life, he was a film critic. He was even a contributor to Ain't It Cool News. And now he's getting back to that with his Substack blog, The Final Cut. You can find a link to that in the episode description. In any case, since Albert is getting back into looking at film and cinema, we'll be discussing with him on this episode his career as a film critic, movie reviewer, whatever you want to call it, and get his thoughts on the problems with film criticism today, the state of the movie business, and much, much more. We'll also delve into the topic of Movie Tok, which is a phenomena on TikTok, and the ways in which it may be degrading film criticism and analysis. We'll also talk about Albert's issues with anti-woke film criticism on YouTube. And yes, that is a whole phenomena on YouTube. All that and much more in the conversation to follow with Albert Lanier. Let's get right to it. Welcome back to Parallax Views. A guest I always enjoy having on. He is someone that offers, I think, interesting perspectives on a number of different topics. We've talked true crime in the past. We've talked about politics and his political analysis, elections. We've talked about everything under the sun with this guest. He's a journalist, but he's also a film critic. And he's now getting back into the film critic fray with his new Substack, The Final Cut. Welcome back to the show, Albert Lanier. How are you doing?
I'm fine. And how are you, JG?
I'm doing good. So let's start with film criticism. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you got involved in film criticism, working at Ain't It Cool News, because that, people forget, Ain't It Cool News, for the younger generation out there, Ain't It Cool News was a big deal back in the day with Harry Knowles. I mean, you know, it was like the in thing. So maybe you could talk about how you got into film criticism, covering film festivals, and working for Ain't It Cool.
So in regards to Ain't It Cool, I found out about Ain't It Cool from someone I knew who was a PR person. I used to go to a film discussion group at a Borders bookstore in Honolulu. And this was someone who was in the group and someone I knew who was a PR person for a hospital, I think. I don't want to give too much away. And she was mentioning, and she told me about the fact that she had sent some items to Ain't It Cool. Now, at the time, I had been covering the Hawaii International Film Festival, or Hawaii Film Festival, for local newspapers. I had been covering it as a journalist, so I wasn't a film critic or reviewer yet. And I did that from about, well, straight through from 1997 to about 2001. Which was easy because all I had to do was go watch a bunch of movies. I guess anywhere from 40 to 50. That's what I noted in my recent article on my Substack Final Cut, in an article called My Favorite Years. But maybe 40 to 50 or 35 to 40 or something, somewhere around that line, and interview people and then write one article. So I only had to write one article for the newspaper. So it was actually easier being just a reporter and journalist than being a film critic. It wasn't until, and so she had sent some items to Ain't It Cool News, and I didn't know what Ain't It Cool News was. And this is something that kind of boggles people's imagination. I knew nothing about Ain't It Cool because I didn't really go and look at film stuff online. Like, maybe it's because I'm old fashioned. I didn't grow up with the internet. You know, I'm a guy in his 50s now, but I didn't grow up with the internet. So Ain't It Cool? I think the only site, I think this was around at the time, because this is 2002 when I started reviewing. I was 32. I think Rotten Tomatoes, I think that was around at the time, if I'm not mistaken. Now, Rotten Tomatoes, I kind of knew, but Ain't It Cool, I didn't. And so I thought, why don't I just send something to them? I was covering a tiny little film festival. I think it was called Cinema Paradise, I think. What I think they call them postcard size or postcard festivals or something. So it was a tiny festival. And I had a friend of mine's a filmmaker, a local filmmaker, and he did a movie called Blood of the Samurai. And I did a review of Blood and the Samurai. And I think that was the first thing that got on Ain't It Cool. And that's how it started. I did a review of this very fun, cheesy but fun B movie that was shot in Hawaii, which I still enjoy a great deal. Over the top film, wonderfully over the top. And that's what started. That's how it started for me to be a film critic and reviewer for Ain't It Cool. That was in 2002. So, and I ended up doing it till 2010 as a film critic and reviewer. And I covered film festivals because that was the only amount of time I had in my schedule as a journalist and as a freelance writer to be able to review movies. So unfortunately.
What's covering film festivals like? Because I'm sure people are like, oh, it must be so fun, et cetera, et cetera. But it also probably gets very tiring having to watch movie after movie after, I mean, I've been to film festivals. It can get pretty crazy.
Right. So it's funny. I was just watching a YouTube channel called James Whale Bake Sale, one of my favorite movie YouTube channels. And I'm not a big fan of film YouTube, as we'll probably go into, or you'll see. But I was recently watching Clint Eastwood talk about when he was on the jury of Cannes, and he said he kind of find out what it's like to be a film critic because they had to watch 22 movies in competition at the Cannes Film Festival, which I believe is coming up in May. And no, I've never covered it. Would like to cover it since I'm looking to possibly get back to covering film festivals. I'd like to cover it, but I've never covered it. And so it's interesting because I talked about watching movies in a row. I guess as a movie star, he's not used to doing it. But covering film festivals is really a three-tiered process for me. Number one was going to screenings and watching movies all day. Number two was trying to fit in times to interview people. And number three was going to events like parties. And the parties were important for me because it was a chance for me to relax. because I was exhausted and dead tired by the time I got to the party. It was like, can I get like a 7-Up or Coca-Cola and sit down and you sit down and talk with people. It's funny, I was watching film Twitter, which I'm a part of, and horror Twitter. And I wanted to say, just before I move on, I really appreciate a lot of the people on film Twitter, especially horror Twitter. They've been wonderful to me because I'm on there and I usually have a good presence. So I don't know if they'll be able to hear this, but thank you guys so much. You've made Twitter work for me again. Because of Elon Musk, I'll just say it. Because of Elon Musk, who I don't like, buying up Twitter, I thought about not spending that much time. And I spend a good amount of time there. I just love it, love interacting with people. But yeah, covering, it's important. Those are the three elements for me in covering film festivals. That's what I found out. 1994 was the first year I did it. It's also the first year I was a journalist and writer. So this first year I covered it. It's odd for me because I went to film festivals starting from the time I was a teenager back in 1985. And I went straightforwardly from about 87 to about 93, just as a high school student, college student, regular person. All I cared about before I was a journalist and a writer was, can I get into this movie? Can I see this movie? That's all I cared about. And that was kind of an interesting, it was kind of a simple time. I realize now. Once I became a journalist, it became more complicated because you have to work. And so I went from being pleasure watching movies just simply to watch movies at festivals, to work. But it was pleasurable work. So one of the things I found, I don't want to give this away, in my article called My Favorite Years, I'll give one element away. In 94, I put the playbook together, quote unquote, in terms of covering film festivals. One of the things that I found I had to do was pre-preparation. So you have to know what are the hot movies, what are the movies that are making the festival circuit, what are the movies that you should watch and review, and the people you should talk to, who's coming in. I had to take all the skills that I developed as a journalist and use it there. So I didn't treat it any differently. I covered elections, local elections, in my career as a freelance writer and journalist. And the same kind of skill set, some basic skill sets, I had to apply for film festivals. So, and I say that in my article, which is called My Favorite Years, and people can find that at my new Substack, Final Cut, which is at allanier.substack.com. But yeah, it was very different. So I'm kind of, I don't know if most people have gone through what I've gone through in terms of film festivals, because I went from somebody who was just a regular film goer to somebody who became a journalist covering it. And so it was kind of an interesting experience, like going from a caterpillar to a butterfly, I guess.
Yeah, you're not going from say, going to film school and learning film theory. You're like just a film goer going into, film journalism. So
now it's interesting that you mentioned film school. My background in terms of, because I have a background in learning filmmaking. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I took a course at my local library, my neighborhood library. This was back in 1982. And so I noticed when I was in the library, there was a course or a class, with the after school classes, called literally Movie Making Class. And it was taught by a guy who owned a video store in some other neighborhood or something. And so I actually learned about filmmaking from this after-school class in my local library from about the fall of 1982 till about near summer of 83. I learned all 6 shots, the close-ups and masters and establishing all that when I was 12 years old. Everyone got a project. So if you're in the class, everyone had their own project. And so what happened was you usually helped work on other people's projects. I held boom mics. I shot camera, shot B-roll because we were doing it on video. I kind of feel, I kind of wish I had learned on film as well, but I only learned filmmaking on video. And those cameras back in the early 80s. Oh my goodness, I hated those cameras. Couldn't stand them. If anybody's seen movies from the 70s and 80s where news crews had those big bulky cameras, those were the video cameras I had. You had to look through the eyepiece. I was like, can I just have something where I don't have to look through the eyepiece? The kind of cameras you have now, the kind of video cameras you have now, digital video cameras, DV cams that you have now, are the kind of cameras I wanted when I was 12 years old as learning to make films. That was what I wanted. I couldn't get it, but that's life. So I took that class, like I said, from 82 to 83, and then they cut the classes at the local library, so that was the end of it. And so we had a party. The library gave us a party, and then, I don't know if I should admit this part. Hopefully Steven Spielberg won't be watching this. We saw a bootleg video of E.T. This was 1983.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so we saw E.T. on video. Not a great version, not the best version, not a pure, pristine, clean version, but it was a version of E.T. And yeah, it was fun because I had seen E.T. at the theaters with my family, but it was nice to see it again. And so I had it was a nice send-off. But the problem was that my background was I had this knowledge. So it was kind of like a mini film school. That was, it was 12, 13 years old. And I had mini school, but I didn't have a video camera. I didn't have a film camera. So I couldn't make movies. And my parents weren't into that. My family
So you
wasn't
did get
into
some
that.
film school education at that young age. Yeah, yeah.
Essentially it was like a de facto film school. So that was in a sense like undergrad. So graduate was going to the film festivals. So when I went to the film festivals as a teenager, I was sophomore in high school and a senior, I think. And then onward and through college, I kind of got the graduate school education in a sense.
So for people that don't know the world of film festivals, I've been to a few over the years, not as many as I'd like, but you know, what's it like? Because they're really long a lot of times, you know.
Oh, yeah. Well, the thing about film festivals that I was just realizing recently is that most people go to see movies at theaters and they don't go to film festivals. The vast majority of people will never go to a film festival. Most people who watch movies will, especially nowadays with streaming platforms and, regular television and all of that and what remaining physical media that there is. I hope they don't get rid of physical media entirely. I really hope. That's my hope.
I mean, we have the boutique labels keeping it up today, but we'll see.
Thank goodness. Yeah, please. One of the things I would say, if I could address the studios directly, I'd say, please do not get rid of your physical video. Keep making those Blu-rays. Keep making it 4K, whatever K. Keep making that stuff because it's beneficial to you, not just to film buffs like me and, former film critic reviewers like me, but also for the studios, I believe. But in any event, covering a film festival for me was, like I said before, it was kind of a change. It was different. I had to work. I can give this away, like I said, what you have to do that I found was you had to do pre-preparation. So you had to know what the hot movies were, what the movies in the festival circuit were, what movies were worth watching. You had to find out who was coming to the festival, try to set up interviews, and also, because those are the three components, right? Going to film screenings every day, trying to arrange interviews with actors and filmmakers, and then going to parties and events. And you try to fit all those in. And the festival that I went to, the Hawaii Film Festival, was like, I think eventually 11 or 12 days. So it's a jam-packed, I'd say week and a half or whatever it was. It's jam-packed because you're meeting people, you're going to films, and that's the way it was. I mean, I literally met some well-known famous people coming out when they were coming in and I was going out. Quentin Tarantino was one. He was coming out of a restaurant. I was coming out of a restaurant. He was going in, and he was there, I think, with a movie called Full Tilt Boogie, which is a documentary, I think, about From Dusk Till Dawn. And we met, and we shook hands, and then I introduced myself, and we talked for about 2 minutes, and I moved on. I didn't get to interview him, but I did meet him. And so, which I liked a lot more. I shouldn't be admitting this. I feel like I'm giving away things, but I liked meeting people more. And what I found when I was at film festivals is when you're an accredited member of the press and you're at a film festival like that, you're in a situation that's different because you're talking with actors and you're talking with directors and you're talking with filmmakers. So, you're having a drink with these people. Well, I don't drink, but they do. Just don't go to Sundance if you want to drink. I haven't been to Sundance. I never got to cover the Sundance Film Festival, but I heard about Sundance. I'm like, I don't know how people get through that without a drink. Because I've been around my share of filmmakers and actors who are fully loaded, much like Herbie. And it's like, yeah, I can't see how people can't get through a film festival. I'm a teetotaler, but I don't begrudge anyone having having a couple of drinks, but I don't see it. But yeah, so when you're in those circumstances with, in some respects, famous people, and other respects, maybe modestly known people or just unknown filmmakers and to the general public, it's a friendlier environment. It's a more relaxed environment. And so the thing I hated was asking for interviews, even though it's part of the business. So if I were to go back to film festivals, and I'm looking to possibly do that, maybe this year, we'll see, or starting from this year, I would have to choose between doing interviews and doing reviews and watching movies. I don't want to do what I did before. I was exhausted. And that led to me eventually quitting being a film critic and reviewer and quitting film festivals because I had a newspaper magazine, and I would normally block out the festival, the Hawaii Film Fest, and I would block that out in regards to work because as I just described, I had enough to do. And
well, I mean, it just sounds like when you're covering a film festival, you're like running around here, you have to go to this screening, then you have to run to get dinner, then you have to, it sounds like a whirlwind ride. Yeah.
Right. You're absolutely correct. You just described it. That's part of it. I'm going here, I'm going there. In the old days, I would bring food with me. I don't know if I should admit that. Before I was a journalist, I would have my backpack and I would bring food with me. So it was like after Thanksgiving, I'd have turkey. I'm watching this movie from Taiwan and I'm eating a turkey leg because the Hawaii Film Fest was Asia Pacific. So that's the movies came from places like Japan, China, Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam, and other countries, which is now bigger because Asian films are much more mainstream now in the United States than they were when I first started covering movies and started covering film festivals. So I think I'm fortunate in that regards. But I would sneak food in. I would be like turkey leg, turkey sandwich, not the stovetop. No, I couldn't do that. I couldn't get away with that one. That'd be kind of odd. I'm like, try to eat that in the dark.
Well, now, was there a specific way that movies were scheduled when it came to the Hawaiian Film Festival? What I mean by that is I know a lot of film festivals that, they'll have a bunch of movies in the day and then they'll have to top it off the midnight movie, which is usually the kind of more out there fare,
I think normally, if I recall correctly, you would normally have screenings. It would vary. I think normally screenings were like 9 in the morning or 10 in the morning, and it would go, and you would have the midnight movie at 11 or maybe at midnight. I think you would have it at maybe 10 or 11. And the midnight movies, the late night movies, were the weirdest movies. You get these weird movies from Japan. Oh my goodness gracious! You get these weird movies from Japan, like I don't know if I saw Tetsuo there, but you get these bizarre movies.
I'd imagine seeing Tetsuo at a film festival would be pretty crazy.
I saw movies. I saw the strangest stuff late at night, and I can't even remember names of the movies because I was probably too exhausted. It was, when you talk about it, was tiring. Even before I became a reviewer, it was exhausting because I was busy especially if I had the time, I'd try to watch as many movies as I could. But I remember.
But at these festivals, you're watching like, I mean, it's almost like 12-hour movie marathon.
There was one film festival that I went to, not the Hawaii Film Festival. It was a smaller festival. I saw 80 movies at that one festival.
What? How is that possible? Movies. What? Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's the record for me, was at least 80 or over movies at one festival. You see a lot of short films because when you go to film festivals, I would watch the narrative feature films, to use a technical term, but feature movies, feature films, short films, and documentaries. Those are the three categories generally. And, I would watch these movies. So you watch the variety. That was the good thing about covering film festivals. It's not, again, that's why I say most people don't go to film festivals. The average film goer does not go to a film festival. And if they do, they probably don't see the menu that exists there. But I was seeing everything. I was having a full course buffet.
How many times did you get to discover hidden gems because of being able to go to the film festivals?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because I've always felt like a lot of film festivals are a good place to find. You always be surprised by like one movie that you may not have heard of, but you go see it and you're like blown away.
Yeah, that's. I think that was true. One year I saw a movie called One False Move. I think it was with Bill Paxton. And I saw that at the film festival. I don't know if I was a journalist back then, but I saw it. I saw that movie. One False Move was one that I recall. And I think Roger Ebert really liked that movie, One False Move.
Yeah, Bill Paxton and Billy Bob Thornton, too, was in it.
Yeah, I don't recall Billy Bob Thornton, but One False Move was one that I can recall. That was one. And there are other gems, but it's been such a long time that there are movies that come to mind in regards that I saw, and there are others that don't. One that and that's the way it is with any festival, because you're seeing so many movies. In a single day, I could see anywhere from 5, depending on what kind of, in some days I could see 10 movies.
Do they ever start blending together when you're watching that many at a time?
That's it. I'm not surprised. Not quite. Probably because I was taking notes. I always had my notepad, and I was always, somebody asked me about a movie. And the thing about being a film critic and a reviewer at a film festival is you talk to average people. I would do that. Now, I don't know if that's really done these days. But, you're talking to average people. You're talking to real people. I hate to put it that way, but you're talking to real people when you're at a film festival. So, that's something that I think is important. And so, because I also went to a film discussion group at Borders, and I talked to people there, some of them went to the festival as well. You always get an idea of what the average person or what regular individuals who might watch a movie or who might watch movies think. Whereas I don't know if other reviewers do that or other film critics do that. Maybe some of them do. I don't know. Maybe Roger Ebert did, because he used to come to the Hawaii Film Festival. And I met Roger when I was 17 years old, at a screening of Citizen Kane at the Hawaii Theater in downtown Honolulu. So that was the first time I met Roger. And he was there not only for that screening, but to do what he normally did at film festivals, which is scene by scene breakdown of movies. So, and he would do it with laser discs. And he did that. I went to the University of Hawaii at Manoa that year to go sit in on the sessions. And that was the first time I sat through that. It was wonderful. It was really great. So Roger's someone I met, like I said, when I was 17, writing for the high school newspaper. And he was kind to me. He was really nice to me. And when I saw him later on, he would come to the festival often. And he would be at the opening day press conference, and he'd always give me 15 minutes for an interview. So I have a lot of positive views of Roger Ebert.
That's good to hear. I have my criticisms of Ebert, but it does seem like he was just a decent person overall, interpersonally.
Your episode with Jim DiEugenio, and I guess he wasn't a fan of Siskel and Ebert, and that show. But yeah, Roger, I make no bones in saying that Roger was one of my favorite film critics, and he was certainly a hero of mine in regards to movie reviewing and film criticism.
What was it that really stood out for you about him? Like, what did you like so much?
In person or in regards to his work?
In regards to his work, especially.
I liked his writing because I would read I'd read his books. And I'd read some of the other reviewers that you mentioned in your episode with Jim DiEugenio too. I had read Pauline Kael, especially, a little Dwight McDonald.
I'm a Pauline Kael guy all the way, but
yes. So I used to read Pauline Kael and I used to read Roger Ebert. And I think that's something that I'll probably comment on this later on, that's kind of missing from film criticism and reviewing. And a lot of the film world, especially with the internet nowadays, is sort of the written, the kind of the basic intellectual nature of written film criticism, and which existed. And again, Jim DiEugenio on Parallax Views did a great job. I would highly recommend that episode, getting into reviewers and so forth. It's interesting he brought up James Agee, who was a critic I always liked. One of my favorite film reviews is a review James Agee did of Treasure of the Sierra Madre. So James Agee is one that I like. Pauline Kael I used to read, as well as Roger Ebert. But Roger, to me, had a kind of nice, readable prose and a very clear sense, as I would call it, as a newspaper critic, because he's writing to a general audience. And I would recommend, if anyone's, especially those people who are quote unquote film reviewers now, who are on online, and whether it's YouTube or Twitter, not so much Twitter, but YouTube or TikTok or wherever else, that I kind of found out about this, last year. I didn't know much. I didn't know these people existed, frankly. These movie influencers and all these, they should watch Roger Ebert's videos where he talks about what a film review should be like, and about film criticism. And even Gene Siskel, but he talks about approaching film criticism like a beat reporter. Remember, I noted before that all the skills that I had as a journalist, covering stuff like politics or any other story, I used in regards to covering film festivals and being a film critic. So I think people should do that because they need it.
I'll say this about Ebert. I mean, credit where credit is due. I didn't always agree with his opinions on films, and I think he had strong biases against certain genres.
Oh, very good.
So for example, I grew up, and I like these movies because I grew up on them,
Mhm.
and I know they're lowbrow, but I grew up on dumb 80s slasher movies. And Ebert hated those
Mhm.
movies, but you could
Oh
read
yeah,
an Ebert review.
an entire show talking about the horror genre and the slasher subgenre.
Right.
I saw it in a documentary, and I saw some of it recently. They didn't like the slasher movies.
Right. But what's
And
interesting is Ebert could write a review of a slasher movie, and I could read it and know that I would like it, even though he hated it. He knew how to
right,
write a review to where even if he disliked the movie, he would give you enough info to make your own judgment if your taste was
that
different. Does that make sense?
that's precisely why I recommend that these so-called film influencers, people who say they're film reviewers, and film critics, and other types of people, whether on YouTube, whether on TikTok, whether on anywhere else online, they should go and watch those videos. They should go and watch the videos on YouTube of Roger talking about film criticism and writing a review and all that, and those videos, because they need to. And that's what Roger was good at. Roger was good at writing clean, clear prose that brought the reader into the subject, whatever the film was. So the subject's the film, brought the reader into that subject, and didn't let go until the end of the review. He's one of the most talented film writers I've ever seen and I've ever read. There are prose stylists. They're as good, if not better, than Ebert in regards to movies. Like I said, James Agee, for one. You also had Pauline Kael, and but you again, part of it was not just that he was a very good writer, but his sheer enthusiasm and his sheer enjoyment of movies, and that's important. I certainly can understand that when I was covering film festivals. It was important to, you're doing these film festivals, part of it is just, it helped to be enthusiastic. And I was enthusiastic because it was the time of the year I could actually talk about movies and see movies and write about movies. So I was enjoying myself.
No problem. So I want to get into the film influencers and stuff like Movie Talk, but before we do that, let's just talk movies more generally, even beyond film
Mm-hmm.
criticism and film critics.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the movie reviewers and the film critics like Kill, Agee, Ebert. Let's talk about film itself and movies. How do you think movies have changed from when you were writing about movies and reviewing movies and criticizing movies and movies today? Because I feel like both of us are probably considered curmudgeons by some people when it comes to movies, because I mean, I know I hold the view that I'm not a big fan of a lot of movies that come out today, and I kind of miss the days when there was more variety and also, I would say, more experimentation in film.
Mm-hmm. Well, what I find is that in the years that, not just that I reviewed movies and attended film festivals, but what I've done in terms of reading about film, history of film, and reading about films in general, what I would call book study, which is what I used to do, not only as a film buff, but also as a reviewer, is that, let's just take the American film industry cycles, right? In the 70s, you had a kind of period where experimentation and intellectualization was actually put at the forefront in many respects because of the success of movies like Easy Rider. And Easy Rider came along and demolished the prevailing notions that were of the kind of movies that could make money in the American box office. at theaters and, well, theaters primarily.
Yeah, this whole period from like the late 60s to the 70s. Yeah.
Right. So whereas before the studios were investing in, fairly big budget musicals and, which were the part of the event films and other types of, I don't want to say innocuous, but, general audience oriented films. Easy Rider came along and made so much money, made millions of dollars on a budget of, I think, less than $1 million. I can't remember. Don't quote me on that. But on a budget, I think, of less than $1 million. So it was a change. And so you had the kinds of movies. I mean, although Robert Altman made MASH in 1970, really Altman's career is as a result of the seismic changes that were occurring. I mean, I think he was really able to become a filmmaker in his own right in the 70s, I think because of movies like Easy Rider. He probably
right, the transition from old Hollywood to new Hollywood.
Yeah, precisely. The new Hollywood at the time. So that's the way it works. And so you had the kinds of movies in the 70s. You had the movies that were made by people like Robert Altman, by Martin Scorsese, what they would call the personal movies, the personal films. And again, it's what I would call experimentation and intellectualization. And I guess personalization as well, those three factors that were occurring. And so what happened was with Jaws, Star Wars, Jaws in 75 and Star Wars in 77, the beginning, the path was created for the rise of a different kind of big budget film. Instead of the general audience movies and the film musicals, you now had the sci-fi spectacles and the action adventure film, so forth.
And you were saying this starts with you cut out there for a second. So you said this starts with Jaws and then also Star Wars, really, in a lot of ways.
Right. So Jaws and Star Wars. Jaws in 1975 and Star Wars in 1977. They began this move toward another kind of metric for Hollywood, which is the big budget genre movies, but a different kind of genre. So whereas the genre had been the musicals and other kind of general audience movies in the 60s and maybe before that 50s, now it's the sci-fi or action adventure, what have you.
The summer blockbuster.
Right. So what happened, and again, I think it's like any business, if you want to look at the business side of it. The film business works in cycles just like some may argue other businesses, other industries work in cycles. And that was a cycle that lasted for several years, from the time of the success of Easy Rider until maybe the success of Star Wars in the late 70s and so forth. And you get into the 80s and you have the kinds of movies in the 1980s that came out, right? The sequels to Star Wars, Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, the kind of James Bond movies that were coming out, For Your Eyes Only and Octopussy and those other types of movies. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom. You're seeing the genre of blockbuster. So a different kind of genre. It's just a different genre movie that becomes the metric, the standard. And so you got to the 90s, and that was the rise of basically the marketable independent movie. What a movie like Pulp Fiction proved was that, and some other movies that were distributed by Miramax, kind of an execrated name now, but movies that were distributed by Miramax, was a smaller outfit, smaller distributor, but they were they were creating a model for independent movies, which is to get them into multiplexes, which is to get them into major theaters and provide them with decent ad budgets that they could get people interested. it was, scaling up the indie movie and scaling up the foreign film. So that was and that had an impact because you saw companies like Focus Features, New Lines, and New Line Cinema, and other independent outfits emerge. And
yeah, and a lot of them I think were called like mini majors, right? Like you had Artisan around at the time, Lionsgate, yeah.
Right. You still have Lionsgate now, and that was the case. So it runs in cycles. And so you saw a certain kind of movie become successful, right? Like, before that, so Pulp Fiction was important in regards to Tarantino because this year is an anniversary of Pulp Fiction. I'm thinking about analyzing it. My first piece for my final cut for my Substack is actually Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs. I do an analysis on Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs, which came out in '92. But I think the real important movie for Quentin Tarantino's career was Pulp Fiction, because that became $100 million and over at the box office film and demonstrated the scaling up of the Miramax model, as I call it, and what could happen. And so what you saw were different, quirky, off-center films. Remember what I said before about the late 60s, the 70s? Intellectualization, experimentation, and personalization. Now you had offbeat, odd, quirky, different in the 90s. So that was a result of movies like Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. Because Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs demonstrated you could make a very, very different kind of, crime movie, an indie crime movie. And Pulp Fiction demonstrated that you could make a profitable indie crime movie. And so that's what important. And the 90s. And then you got to the 2000s and became about, so right now I'd say we're at the kind of tail end of the 2000s. Because what happened was, I think it was X-Men in 2000, I think. But you had the superhero movies. But what you more importantly had, and this is a point that I also like to stress, is you had what I call the pre-sold audiences. Harry Potter in the late 90s, and movies like Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. Those were important because what they demonstrated was that you could take a book franchise or some other kind of franchise and have an audience that was loyal to that product or item, and it could translate into big bucks. Now, before you had novels that were turned into movies, like The Godfather, that became successes. But that wasn't really the formula for Hollywood movies. The formula was to develop movies, develop scripts, and develop movies that could become hits, right? So, yeah, you had movies based on novels that would be hits, but a novel represents a small audience. It's only so many readers of a novel. So if that's more of a prestige thing, it's more of a symbol you use to get people interested in your movie. Whereas now with something like Harry Potter, you have a rabid audience that will not only go and buy the books for Harry Potter, but will go see the movies. And so the pre-sold audience has dominated Hollywood since the late 90s with the Harry Potter movies and, of course, Star Wars, The Phantom Menace. And so the superhero movies that came in the 2000s have built on this. They're the ultimate pre-sold movies because they have a fan base that is second to none and rabid. And so what the studios have been doing is using the Comic Cons, the comic conventions, as centers and platforms for marketing, advertising, and promotion of movies. They've gone to the audience, whereas before they would only be able to do that through television, and they would be able to do that through radio and through advertising, and of course trailers. Now they can go directly at these events and directly market. That's what separates the superhero movies and the comic book movies from other kinds of movies. Now, there are other sci-fi movies and other kinds of movies at these Comic-Cons. As anyone who's gone to them, I've gone to Comic-Cons, will know. But what you're seeing on the part of the studios, of Paramount, of Disney, of Universal, and others, is going to the Comic-Cons and marketing and promoting and pushing their products directly there, and their promotion and marketing platforms for these studios. And so we're in the pre-sold audience boom of the 2000s, and that may be coming to an end. If you look at 2023, some of these movies didn't do well. The Flash, for example, was a huge flop. You're looking at other superhero movies. Yeah, you're looking at them flop because, again, cycles. Everything runs in cycles, not only in the movie business, but also in every other business. So things will only last for so long. They'll only last for so long.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to comic books, right? Like in the 80s and whatnot, you get the grim and dark comic books, especially thanks to Alan Moore. But then eventually that goes out of favor and you get something different, you know? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so at some point you have to have a replacement for that. And something has to come along. It always is different. So you have to take a look at the movies that are coming out now and taking a look at what not only does well financially, but what does well critically, right? What seems to be moving literally forward is you get movies made about things, products, items. Barbie is a great example of that. That's literally based on a doll. Granted, that's fleshed out and turned into a story, but it's literally based on a toy. It's based on a doll. So that seems to be a possible trend. I don't know if it'll actually happen, but it seems to be that, because Jerry Seinfeld has something I think that's coming out on, I don't know if it's Netflix or something, about Pop-Tarts, a movie about Pop-Tarts. You know, again.
Yeah, I believe it's called Unfrosted. It's like the story of Pop-Tarts. Yeah.
Right.
And how it got made. Yeah.
Item, right? That's the food item, right? Food product. But again, you're seeing that's one possible permutation there. In terms, again, we have to look at what will occur. And it will be interesting to see what movies rise and develop afterwards.
With regards to how film has changed, I mean, this is getting into personal taste, but we were talking before we recorded about, like the movies of someone like, say, Joe Dante, who's made so many underrated films. I mean, people know him for stuff like Gremlins, but he also made a really nice movie that we were talking about called Matinee, which is about, the drive-in film circuit. And, John Goodman is in it, is basically a stand-in for the legendary gimmick laden director, William Castle. But we were saying off air how, movies like that, you don't see them as much anymore. Maybe that'll change. But do you think, how have movies changed in a way that maybe went against your own cinematic interests over the years?
Well, I eventually had to stop. I eventually stopped being a reviewer and a critic because I was burnt out. I was talking about the hectic pace of covering film festivals, and I had to cover a story. I think it was an election story. I can't remember. But I had to do it. And I normally set the film festival aside just to work that because it's exhausting enough. And I had to come home after 12 hours and, transcribe interviews. And it was just a nightmare. That was in 2008. And so in 2009, I made the decision, okay, next year is my last festival. I'm taking a break. So I had that break for 14 years. But I was just tired. I was exhausted. In terms of how movies have changed for me, again, I saw the pre-sold formula or this pre-sold process or whatever you want to call it. In the late 90s, I was telling people about that. And so I knew that movies were inevitably going to be about getting as many warm bodies into as many theaters, seeing a handful of movies that have superheroes in them, or are based on comic books, or based on some superhero comic book. you know. So I'm somebody who used to read comic books when I was a kid, and I used to, look at superhero stuff, but I got to a point where it's like, guys, enough already. John Carter, Man from Mars, really? You're going in that direction? What's next? Doc Savage, Man of Bronze? I mean, what? Like how many books can you milk millions from? I mean, at some point, the train's got to stop. It's got to stop at some point. And so I was fortunate as a reviewer because I was going to a film festival like Hawaii Film Festival and at other film festivals. I was covering movies that were not the superhero box. Like for Ain't It Cool, I never handled the superhero movies. I never handled the big box office. So I didn't really have that. I think it was easier, frankly, in writing for Ain't It Cool News because I was contributor to Ain't It Cool for about 8 years, about 2002 to 2010. And I think it was easier because I could just see the movies I wanted to see, the smaller films, somewhat larger movies, but see the kind of movies, some of the personal films, but the more interesting movies. And I could review them and I could take a look at them or take a look at them and then review them. And so I guess for me, it was easy. I didn't have to worry about big box office movies and dealing with that stuff. And I think that was probably a good move on my part.
You were lucky in that regard because I guess what chafes me today, and I don't know how you feel about this, is, in the 90s, you could still see certain smaller movies end up in theaters. We mentioned Joe Dante's Matinee. Abel Ferrara's movies would end up in theaters. Even like Ken Russell. I'm a big fan of Ken Russell, and I've always thought his 90s response to Pretty Woman was a very interesting movie. The movie, it's called Whore with Teresa Russell.
Yes, with Teresa Russell.
And I actually think that's it's a very wild, low budget movie, and it was released in theaters. They, the tagline was, if you can't say it, see it, because they wouldn't like advertise it, but they still showed it in the theaters. And I feel like now so many theaters, so many screens are taken up by whatever the latest, Doctor Strange or Spider-Man movie is, that you're not seeing those kind of more risk on investment type movies. Because I think, back in the 90s, there was that experimentation still. I just saw a movie, and I'm sorry to ramble, but, I just saw a movie a few days ago. It's older, from the 90s, Dan Aykroyd's Nothing But Trouble.
Yes.
Which was a horrible box office bomb. But it's interesting because they gave Dan Aykroyd $40 million to make a movie that, I don't know how anyone could have thought it was going to make money. It's basically Dan Aykroyd doing Texas Chainsaw. But in a way, there's something wonderful about that period. Just because the fact that Aykroyd would be given that money to make such a wildly different film. Whereas today, I feel like almost all the screens are taken up by, Marvel franchise movies. And I think there's something that's been lost in the process.
Yeah, the pre-sold movie. So like I said before, that's become the metric. So what that's done is completely take over most screens, as they would call theaters, essentially screens. Most screens are taken up by, Doctor Strange, Avengers, enough already. No, just joking. They'll get upset if I think. Injustice League of America, whatever the latest comic book movie is. So, what that's done, also the business model has changed because you have streaming now. And so what
not just that, but the American theater market is not their biggest market anymore either.
Yeah. Well, it hasn't been for a while. So the studios, I don't know if this was hidden. It's not hidden anymore, but for years, I would argue maybe from the 80s onward, the foreign market has been vital to Hollywood. And that's where they make most of their money. They don't really make their money in domestically. I mean, they make money domestically, but they don't make their money. Where movies make money domestically are probably smaller ones. So what you would call independent movies, that's where the ones that are going to, I mean, they go overseas, but that's where you make your money or recoup your investment. You get your ROI. But the reality is the business has changed, right? So what you saw during the pandemic was that Universal had put this family movie exclusively on streaming. I think first run, not in theaters. I forget the name of it. The Croods, I think, something along that line. And that made like $20+ million. And when I saw that, I said, "Oh, what I had thought might happen may happen after all," which is that the studios can now bypass theaters if they want to. Because theaters are convenient because you can make money off of them, and the split favors the studios normally. Doesn't favor the theater owners. As everyone who knows anything about movies knows, the theaters make their movie through concessions. So when you go to the snack bar and you get the popcorn and you get the candy bars and you get at, that's how they're making that money. They're not making it off the movie because their cut is less. I'll give you an example. Like I went to an IMAX. I remember going to the IMAX theater in Waikiki here in Honolulu when they had one. I don't know if they have one anymore. Not in Waikiki. But the manager was talking about, we get a better cut because it was like 60-40. If you're talking about the studios and the distribution entities and theaters, it's less than that. It will vary. So, because the studios, I think, normally make their money on the first week. They get the lion's share of that money. So if a movie grosses 90 million the first week, they're going to get most of that. They're going to get most of that gross. And then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller, I think, week after week. And the split, it favors the studios and the production facilities, the production entities more. So that's important. The business has changed. I think we're at a point where if the studios wanted, they could just put everything on streaming.
Do you think something will be lost as it goes further in that direction?
Yeah.
What I mean by lost, I mean lost for the public and movie-going audiences, because I've had debates with people, and I'm not trying to ramble, but I want to give my view on this and then bounce it off you. I've had debates with people. People will say to me, "I don't like going to movie theaters. It's loud. It's like, what if there's like someone in the audience that's annoying or loud, blah, 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 blah. I'd rather just stream the movie at home." But I do think something is lost when you don't have that theater experience where you're seeing it on a big screen with a crowd of people. There's nothing more joyous to me than being in a movie theater, and laughing when there's a joke, or screaming when there's a horror scene, or, gasping when, the hero is in danger. And when it's like there's a collective experience to the movie theater experience that I think is lost in streaming. And I really think the fall of movie theaters scares me, actually.
I'm so used to being in theaters in the past and watching movies at film festivals with audiences. When I'm, there, to work the festival beat, or what passed for the festival beat in my hometown, that what you get is not necessarily hearing an audience or seeing an audience, but being in an audience and being in a theater more. Because you have to focus on the movie. You don't focus on a movie when you're at home watching it on your whatever, how 20 screen flat screen TV, 20-inch flat screen
or
TV,
hell,
or
people,
however.
I mean, as David Lynch pointed out recently, now people are watching movies on their fucking iPhone, as David Lynch put it. Or I'm like, how can you watch a movie on an iPhone?
I watched it.
Really?
I watched it on my tablet.
Okay.
I watched Antonioni's The Passenger on my tablet. I watched Tarkovsky's Solaris on my iPhone. I mean, on my smartphone. So I've done it because that's the reality. I can watch movies on YouTube.
That's
and
true.
I do.
That's true.
Do I consider it the same? No. I can watch movies on streaming. I'm going to go watch a movie now. I mean, after I'm going to get some lunch, and then I'm going to go watch movies on streaming. Is it the same as seeing it in a movie theater? Hell no. It's not meant to be. So from my perspective, it's a purist perspective. Yes, you can argue there are people who talk, there are people who ruin the experience, there are people who do that. That's all true. But that's the way that movies were intended to be seen. And it's the best way to screen them because it forces discipline upon the viewer and the film.
Right. You're not able to just pull out your phone and, texting all the time.
You can if somebody doesn't get pissed off.
Right. Well, that's true.
But you have to go and focus on the movie. That's the whole point of movies. They're intended for you to watch.
And be immersed.
And to see. Yeah. Not to look at. You can look at television. Notice people say, I looked at television. But you watch a movie.
Right.
That's the whole point. Yeah. So it's important. Again, I'm going to go and watch some movies today on streaming.
So before we start closing out, you wanted to talk a little bit about Movie Tok, which you and I introduced you and Jim DiEugenio to Movie Tok, and I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not a big fan of a lot of this film influencer stuff that's happening on social media. I think it's I don't think it allows for like really in-depth criticism and discussion of movies. What's your take on it?
I just found out about this stuff like last year, really, and because I did what few film YouTube channels I went to, like that guy Oliver Parker, I think his name is, the retrospective film review. Like his stuff I could watch, and I can't watch now because he does a good job. But I didn't really watch it or know a lot about film YouTube. Or another one is Be Kind Rewind, which I've seen, and James Whale Bake Sale. Those are all ones I take a look at and can watch. But I didn't know I didn't know the world of film YouTube because, again, I stopped reviewing in 2010. And I didn't have any interest in keeping up with what's the latest and what's the greatest and what's the newest. You find out things. And so when I did find out about it, I just thought it was complete and utter crap. I mean, I don't want to say everyone is crappy and stupid and imbecilic, but it says something about what's been lost. You talk about what's been lost in movies. There's a lot that's been lost in regards to film criticism because I stopped being a film critic in 2010. Apparently, you have people, I think there's been a kind of impact on film criticism. I think you've had film critics that were kind of either laid off or fired from newspapers and, less formal film critics. I mean, again, my background was as a freelance journalist and writer. I went to a liberal arts college and got a bachelor's degree. I studied English and I studied history. As I mentioned before, I read reviewers. And again, I cite the importance of reading reviewers and reading critics and, the textual, as we might say now, the textual aspect of film critique and film criticism. And that seems to be lost. I'm sure there are people who are doing film blogs and people who are doing film sites and people who are doing reviews that are perfectly fine. But this film talk looks like schlock. I call it film schlock.
Movie talk.
Movie talk. Movie schlock.
I'm not to interrupt you, but if people don't know Movie Tok, it's a phenomenon on TikTok. And there was a really interesting piece on the New York Times, I believe a year or so ago. They review movies on TikTok, but don't call them critics. These Movie Tok influencers don't like to be called critics. And what they find out in this article is that some of these Movie Tok creators who are doing these video reviews on TikTok are getting paid, $30,000 to review a movie. I mean, they're not reviewers and they're not critics. They're essentially acting as advertisers for the studios.
Well, yeah, what's happened is this. This is, when I heard a little about this and from what I've observed, what's happened is this. Since I left in 2010, what's happened is the studios have essentially won. They've triumphed over the film critic and reviewer. They triumphed over us because we were only tolerated because we provided essentially a form of advertising and promotion for them. That's why film critics are tolerated by the movie studios, by Universal, by Paramount, by Disney, by all of them, by 20th Century Fox, by all of them. They were only tolerated because they could take our blurbs or take our quotes and turn them into blurbs and use it as a form of marketing and promotion. Now, I'm a pragmatist. I've had to be because I was a freelancer for 22 years. So I go, okay, so be it. You kind of had to accept the reality of certain situations. But I was aware years ago that the studios were paying people to pretend to be film critics, to pretend to be reviewers, putting up, that was going on years ago. So now what you have now is not film criticism, but film and film reviews per se. But what you have are minions and sort of people that are the coterie of the movie studios and the production houses. What you have are fans that are masquerading as reviewers. What you have are people that, and in many cases, what you have also is the rise of what I call the right-wing blogosphere. Not blogosphere, but the right-wing film sphere, where you have people like...
I'm going to stop you right there. It's not just the right-wing film sphere, it's the right-wing film grift.
That's an even better way to put it. I'll call it the right-wing film sphere. But they are grifters. What you find is that you have these people, in particular ideologically, that are right-wing Republican libertarian types that should be talking about politics and policy and ideology and not about movies or films or entertainment, because they're absolutely lousy at it. One, because they're basically illiterate imbeciles. They're complete and utter morons. I came across a video from this guy called Critical Drinker. I had never seen a video of his before. And this is the video. The video was his ranting and his criticism of people who find themes in movies. So let me get this straight. You're anti-thematic. Because I thought these were, against, female superheroes and strong female characters, and therefore more masculine superheroes and more masculine characters. I don't know if that's still a part of what he's about. And this whole hero's journey, as I like to call it, Zero's journey, because it's taken as some kind of formula. And I'm not a fan of formulas.
You're referencing Joseph Campbell there, right?
Yeah, it's Zero's journey. Campbell is fine, but you're taking a philosophical, mythological construct and trying to apply it to movies. And that doesn't make any sense. It's part of the intellectually devoid and way of thinking about writing scripts and producing movies that has existed for years. I think really good filmmakers internationally around the world, not only then, but now, people like Bergman, Fellini, Antonioni, and even in this country, Sidney Lumet, Martin Scorsese, Robert Altman, and other filmmakers, they don't need to waste their time writing films to formula or getting scripts that are written to formula or dealing with formulas. Or their films are great and their films work because they eschew formula and they eschew some calcified construct, a calcified narrative construct, and some narrow process that this beat has to happen in this scene, in this act. And so the critical drinker, who I like to call, I guess, who should probably keep drinking and stop thinking, because he hasn't started thinking in terms of what I'm hearing from this guy. The fact that this guy doesn't like themes is like going to the opera and hating to hear high notes being sung. This is stupid. This is the problem with what passes for film reviewing, is that you people who don't know how to review movies. This is why I said they should watch Roger Ebert. They should watch Gene Siskel. They should watch some of the things they've said about reviewing movies and videos, because they need it. They don't know how to review movies. They don't know how to analyze movies, because they're analyzing using a formula. They're taking Joseph Campbell's system, which is basically a literary philosophical system and mythological system, and applying it smack dab to movies and saying, this is the way to do it. No, it's not the way to do it. And it's the
only way to do it.
No, it's not.
Right.
There wouldn't be movies by people like Antonioni or Godard or Jean-Luc Godard or Akira Kurosawa or Zhang Yimou, who's a filmmaker I've met. There wouldn't be movies by any of these people if they just wrote them according to formula as writer-directors. Hell, there wouldn't be a Quentin Tarantino. All you need to do, in my Final Cut newsletter on Substack, the first piece I do is an analysis of Reservoir Dogs. That movie is the complete rejection of these formulas. It's the complete rejection, because the beginning of Reservoir Dogs, they don't talk about the plot. They don't talk about plot points or setting up scenes. They talk about Madonna. They talk about tipping. They sound like real. You know why? Because they sound like real people. And that's the problem. Whether you like Quentin Tarantino or not, he wrote a script where you listen to the characters and they sound close to real people having real conversations. And in a low-budget crime movie like that, you just rarely saw that. The characters that become people, that's important in movies. Characters that remain characters create bad movies or mediocre movies. But in Reservoir Dogs, those characters become people. That's why it's a good movie. It's a very good movie. Because that beginning sets up those characters without having the formulas, the script formulas, the screenplay processes that you see done, the method of a John Truby, who's I think he's a good guy, or other people. They're doing what they feel is right, and I don't mind them. I read John Truby's stuff and I read Sid Field's stuff, but you read that stuff and then you put it aside if you really want to make good movies. You really want to make good movies. So these people like Critical Drinker or they like to call him Uncritical Stinker, or Nerdrotic, or whatever they call themselves, they have no business reviewing movies, talking about movies, or having anything to do with movies. Stick to politics on the right-wing side. And
it's interesting because you're giving a very different critique than I see most people giving of these sort of right-wing anti-woke movie reviewers.
Yeah, because they like the politics. It's all about the politics for them. They don't like woke movies, right? Well, who cares? Who cares? It's like any other movie. Oh, I don't like this movie. Who cares?
Well, the interesting thing is you'll sometimes see them say a movie is going to be woke, and then when it comes out, they'll say it's not woke. So when that Super Mario Brothers movie came out, there were a bunch of people saying, "Oh, it's elevating Princess Peach. This is woke. It's against men." And then I think like Alex Jones from InfoWars was saying, "No, this is like a masculine movie. It's anti-woke." I mean, they kind of just fit these movies into whatever they want to into their culture war.
for the right wingers, the libertarian Republican types, who I'm convinced are funded by libertarian and right wing causes. I think that's the case for this Foundation, I think, for Economic Freedom, which does videos on movies. I think they're the ones that said that Ghostbusters is really, the original Ghostbusters is really libertarian or whatever. So these are funded, I believe. Some of these guys are funded by right wing causes and right wing sources. I'm convinced. But if they're not, the problem is what they have is their own formula, but their own formula is ideological. And it's not even really ideological. It has no bearing on the movies. They don't really like movies. They don't really want to deal with movies. Movies are an area they moved into to discuss politics, to discuss ideology. That's the problem. And so these people had business. A lot of people on YouTube, not everybody. There are, like I said, I've mentioned some names of some YouTube channels that are very good. But a lot of these so-called reviewers should get the hell off of YouTube, and they should get the hell out of the business if they're not even in the business. And the ones that are basically funded by the studios should be called out for what they are. The minions of the big studios that are doing the bidding. Like I said, I think the studios have won. They've won. And I think what they've done is they tried to make the film critic and the real film reviewers irrelevant. And so what they have are fans.
That's the other interesting thing about the whole anti-woke culture war stuff is now you'll have the anti-woke people come out whenever a big movie comes out, and they'll decide whether it's woke or anti-woke. And then if they deem it anti-woke, and let's say it's just a really crappy movie, then the studio can say, well, the reason this movie is not doing well in theaters is because the anti-woke people are just racist or misogynist. And it becomes this thing where both parties mutually benefit from it because the studios can make up excuses for why the movie didn't do well. They can blame it on the anti-woke crowd, and the anti-woke crowd gets what they want because they're bringing in money from all the clicks they're getting.
Yeah. Well, it
could just be that the movie is crap. It's not woke or anti-woke.
Well, it's an easy excuse for the studios. These YouTubers, so some of these YouTubers target movies. Let's be very honest about this. Indiana Jones, the last Indiana Jones movie, all I saw, when I was finding out about when I found out about YouTube and TikTok and all this kind of stuff, movie stuff, Indiana Jones, the last Indiana Jones movie was targeted by these people. They constantly had videos out there. And I think part of the reason, I'll be brutally honest, I think part of the reason that movie did badly at the box office was because of the incessant and negative bad videos and bad rhetoric coming out online, not only on YouTube but elsewhere. They targeted that movie, they went after it. And that's what they'll do to other movies. They did it with Little Mermaid. Again, you have to look. These are people that would just talk about politics. Just be honest and talk about politics. You don't like movies. You don't know anything about movies. You couldn't even write a movie. You can't even spell movies, guys. Just shut the hell up and get the hell off of YouTube.
Right.
Or TikTok or wherever you are. And again, they're being, the studios know what they're doing. Again, you don't have the film critics that are coming along and are I hate to say like police. I don't like to use that term, but they're providing checks and balances. They're providing checks and balances. They're providing a sense of decorum. They're providing a sense of taste, of standards. And a lot of that taste, there's a lack of taste, a lack of standards, and a lack of order in regards to what passes for film reviewing and film criticism. And what you have is something that has become too popularized because of YouTube. And that's the reality. We got to live with it. It's just the way that it is. But it's become too popularized. And, when everyone, it's not that everyone shouldn't have their say about movies. It's we don't need to hear from everyone about movies. That's why people like me were important, because our opinions mattered because we had taste and tact and standards and intelligence.
I'm predicting the response.
I cite Critical Drinker as an example of lack of intelligence.
I'm expecting a response that people are going to give to you saying that is, well, are you saying that the democratization of film criticism is a bad thing?
Well, what film criticism? There's a democratization of film commenting. There's not a democratization of film critics. You just mentioned that a lot of these people that are on Movie Tok or YouTube or whatever, they don't call themselves film critics. So they're not real film critics. They're not even real film reviewers. So why in the hell should anyone listen to them? Now, if the people are honest enough to say, look, I do this because I enjoy it. I do this because it's a sideline. I do this as a hobby. I'm not a professional film reviewer. I'm not a professional critic. It's, I enjoy movies. That's fine because you're being honest and you're not trying to BS everyone. And we can at least get a sense of what's there. And, like someone like, and I think people do get a little honest, like Chris Stuckman, for example. It can kind of bite you in the butt. But at least the guy's saying, look, this is how this is what I want to do in regards to movies. Now, I would never come out and say I was not going to review a movie in a negative fashion.
Right. For people that don't know, Chris Stuckman was big on YouTube as a movie reviewer. But in recent years, because he's trying to become a filmmaker himself and he doesn't want to, I guess, maybe anger studios and possibly hurt his connections in the business, he has said, I'm only going to cover movies that I want to celebrate.
I'd rather have somebody come out and do that. I'd rather somebody come out and do that. And at least, though I don't agree with it, I can respect him for doing that. I can respect him because that's somebody who's willing to be honest with his audience to some extent at that point and say, look, hey, I want to make movies. I can't be that negative because then, I'll ruin my networking and I'll ruin my shots. And you kick at that and go, oh, you're a kiss. You can go and say all kinds of things about it. Kiss it as, you're trying to be a people pleaser. You're trying to do all things. But I'd rather somebody come out and do that as opposed to somebody who's taking money under the table from the studios and saying, I really like this movie. Look at the production values. Look at the acting. Yeah, you love it because you're getting paid to love it. You're not getting paid by a newspaper. You're not getting paid by a TV station, as it used to be in the past, TV station. You're not getting paid by anyone else, a magazine. You're getting paid directly by the studios. Basically, we don't need whores. We don't need film whores. And that's what we have on YouTube and we have on TikTok and we have in other places. We have a degree of whoring that's going on in regards to movie reviewing, so-called movie reviewing. I'm listening to me say this and I'm going, this is going to piss off some people.
Well, that's what we're here to do, I think. But last thing I wanted to, I do want to mention this. In regards to the whole anti-woke thing, I don't like the anti-woke, film, YouTube circuit people, whatever they are. I think they, though, in the way they attack films, I actually think does cover up something that is really, I think, a problem with a lot of movies I watch, which is sometimes I do think movies can lack tact or subtlety in wanting to get a message across, or movies. There are some movies that come out today that will spell out the themes as if I, as a viewer, can't figure it out and am too stupid to understand it, to the point where you have to have Jamie Lee Curtis giving in a monologue about what the movie is. And I don't like that
that's
either.
Always been the case. Yeah, well, I think that's always been the case to a certain extent. To a certain extent, that's been true at times. But again, I don't think that these anti-woke people, the critical stinkers, the uncritical drinkers or whatever they call them, spasmodic or neurotic or whatever they call themselves, I don't think that these people actually care about movies. I don't think
I agree with you. I think they're actually making, in some ways, they make criticisms of movies harder in that sense. Because if I want to criticize a movie for being,
They're criticizing the themes of the movies.
Right,
you know,
right.
unlike critical thinker, they're criticizing the themes.
Yeah.
They're criticizing the characters. They're criticizing the politics. That's all
Right.
they care about. The
Right.
ideology, politics. If you write off movies as ideological and political, that's all they need. It's specific. It's
right.
it's
that's what I was going to say. I think I will criticize a movie not necessarily for its themes, but maybe how those themes are explored. You know, if there's a lack of subtlety, that's not what they're doing, though. You know, and that's what annoys me, is because now if I criticize a movie for its lack of subtlety in the way it explores themes, you know, people may mistake that for one of these anti-woke grifter types. And I think, you know, that actually does a disservice to being able to explore movies. I think the anti-woke film YouTube people have actually made it harder to honestly discuss movies.
Because they don't care about movies. They care about politics. That's fine. Talk about politics. Go elsewhere and talk about politics. Don't infect movie discourse, movie criticism, movie reviewing, movie commenting with your right-wing rabble nonsense.
You know what's weird about it too, Albert, is
yes.
I've often made a joke that there's certain movies that if they came out today, you know, these channels like the Quartering or Critical Stinker, as you call him, if a movie like Ridley Scott's Alien came out today, they would call it woke, because the Ripley character, you know,
a strong female character who survives at the end. We got to get rid of this crap. This is anti-male. This is anti-masculine. This is too feminine. We can't have this. Again, they'd say that about Aliens too, but Jim Cameron's Alien. Oh, she blows everything up. She survives again.
And we're talking about movies that were made in the late 70s, 80s. I mean, this is what they would think of these movies if they were made today. You know.
Yeah. Again, it's politics, has nothing to do with film. It's their ideology. I'm fine with them talking about their ideology and not liking what they perceive to be left-wing or liberal. That's fine. Keep it to yourself or talk about it somewhere else. We don't need you pretending to be reviewers, because you're not. You're just ignoramuses who don't know anything about writing, who don't know anything about literature, who don't know anything about film. Now, somebody like a Chris Gore, a film threat, he kind of has some of that mentality, but I get the feeling that he likes movies. And so I could have a conversation with him.
So you were saying Chris Gore, for people that don't know, he started, I believe he started Film Threat magazine. And I think, I think that Chris has made some valuable contributions. He's leaned into some of this anti-woke film stuff, right. but continue with what you were saying, because the
one thing I will say about Gore, having seen him, I think I've seen one or two videos of him. He does seem like somebody who is actually interested in movies. I think he's a filmmaker as well. So while I may not agree with his politics, while I may not agree with his ideology, I can at least see this is a guy who has some passion for movies and likes movies, even if he doesn't care for some threads or themes or aspects of movies. So you can see that with a Chris Gore. But I have absolutely no respect for a lot of these other people. From what I've seen, just getting to see a little of this and finding out about it, I have no respect for these
none
people.
of it has anything to do with film, is what you're saying. I mean, really, it's about their culture war.
It's irrelevant to movies. It really is. And, anti-woke is a joke. It just is. It just really is. And so, again, I don't know if people will like hearing that, but tough, too bad.
So closing out here, anything you want to say in closing? And
yeah. What I did want to say, I wanted to come back to, I guess I want to talk a little about the final thing was in covering festivals. I did an article for my Substack Final Cut called My Favorite Years, which was about covering film festivals. And one of the things that people ask me if they find out at covered festivals, or, it's like, who did you meet and who did you talk to and so forth. And in that article, I mentioned the number of people, but I couldn't mention everybody. So that I did, because otherwise it would take too long, a series of paragraphs in my piece. So one of the things that one of the things that you do when you're covering film festivals is you see people that are filmmakers, you see directors, you see sometimes screenwriters, mostly actors and actresses, right? And in my piece, I mentioned a number of them. John Ritter is one. I know you're a fan of John Ritter. He came to the Hawaii Film Fest for a movie called Hacks, I think. It was about TV writers. And John was a nice guy, and I got to interview him. Really nice guy. I think a good film actor. I don't think he kind of became the film actor that he could have been. I think he ended up, with more success in TV than films, which I thought is a shame, because I think that he seems like an actor that anybody would want to work with. And I can only go by my experience talking to him.
It's interesting too, because he's often pigeonholed as like a comedy actor because of Three's Company, but he actually did a few like thrillers and dramas too over the years.
Right.
He had a broader range than people realize. Yeah.
Yeah, he was a very, very good actor and very talented. And I think, he was known as a comic actor because he was so good on Three's Company, and because of all the physical comedy that he had to do. And Three's Comedy, as far as I'm concerned, is more Fado. It's closer to Fado or Fado farce, and farce in general, bedroom farce, than anything else. And some people will go, what? They won't want to hear me say that. I'm sorry, but that's my assessment of Three's Company. And innuendo, very good at innuendo. But I liked a movie he did years ago when I was a kid called Hero at Large. Skin Deep was one with Blake Edwards. It's unfortunate, though, that he didn't really become a bigger film actor. But those are the breaks. I enjoyed talking to him. I met him. I had an interesting experience with Pat Morita.
From Karate Kid.
Yes. I met him at a party because, we were talking earlier about going back and forth and, being hectic. I was at a party and I had to go see a movie. Seems like I'm always doing that when I'm covering film festivals. And I saw him there. He was there, I think, for some movie. I can't remember what. And I went up to him. I said, "Oh, I just wanted to meet you," introduce myself, and shook hands. And he didn't make eye contact with me. So his head was on a swivel. So he was like, "Oh, that's nice to meet you." He was polite enough, but he didn't look at me once. It was interesting. So I felt a little like Kreese from The Karate Kid. Let me see other experiences. Roger Corman is somebody I met at a party. I met him at a film festival party. And he was a guy that was interesting to talk to. I think anybody who wants to be a filmmaker, director, screenwriter, and work in independent films, number one, should study his work and study his business method. Did I go over this earlier? I'm trying to remember whether I did or not. I know I mentioned it. I mentioned it at one point. But basically his process, as I call it, was identify and supply a market. Make your production budgets above and below the line pretty low budget so that you can earn a return on investment, and be flexible in regards to genre, and be flexible in regards to the kinds of movies, whether it's sci-fi, action, adventure, certain kinds of dramas. And if something comes along that's hot, go with that, and maybe do some. My favorite Corman movies were like Bucket of Blood. I love that one. And let me see, The Intruder with William Shatner.
Right, unfortunately, the race relations drama. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was a very good movie.
Which was that was his attempt to do a really serious sort of, almost, I would say, prestige film.
That's what I'd say. You got to understand. People have to understand. Corman tried. He made an effort to go and make the serious so-called movies or personal. I don't know if it's personal, but I think it was kind of personal for him. He tried, but it didn't make money. So, that's important. I think anybody should go and study it. And he told me when I was talking with him, he said, I asked him, well, how come the studios aren't really doing what you're doing, making some of these cheaper movies? And he said, they don't want to spend $100,000 to make $700,000. I thought, it's a fair enough. That's fair enough in regards to it. I'm trying to recall. I met Samuel L. Jackson. I remember at a press conference at a hotel. Interesting guy. He's a lively guy and a smart guy. It's very obvious why that guy was successful. He's not so much a hard worker, but a smart worker. He's a guy who understood enough of the business to know you got to get out there and start making money. Because he was a stand-in one point, when he went to New York, I think out of college, people were like, well, where are you studying? And he was saying, I'm working. Well, I'm not studying. So he has an interesting work ethic. So I met him. I got to meet him. I remember it was a Q&A. I think it was a press conference type thing. And I mentioned I had Q&A, I was an 8 at Cool News. He was like, yeah, well, I don't see your name there that much. He was a fun guy to talk to. It's interesting. I met Nancy, some other kinds of people that I would meet. Well, I met Quentin Tarantino.
Well, you said Nancy who?
I was saying Nancy Kwan, but
Okay.
That's something that some people may understand. I met her. Boy, that woman, she was in The World of Susie Wong and some other movies. Fabulous shape. That was, I hate to say that about actresses, but that was a woman, I forget how old she was. Wonderful lady to talk to. But she was in great shape. A woman who really took care of herself. But Quentin Tarantino I met, he was, I think, at the festival one year with the Full Tilt Boogie, I think, documentary about.
You mentioned that, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah, that I met him, right. So, see, I'm getting old. I'm forgetting these things. Toni Collette is interesting. Her profile has gotten much bigger because I guess the movie Hereditary was such a huge movie in regards to the genre, horror genre. I met Toni Collette one year. I think she was on the jury, and had a very pleasant conversation with her. I don't know if I should mention this, but she was bald. I don't know if she had a role or it was for a part or whatever, but it was kind of jarring because I had seen her a couple of years ago in a movie called Muriel. That was at the first festival that I was a journalist at.
What was the movie?
First film festival. Muriel's Wedding.
Okay.
That was one of her first big lead roles.
Right.
And I saw that movie, which is a wonderful movie. I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I saw her in that movie, and I saw her at the festival, and we got to chat. Very pleasant conversation. It's interesting seeing her in Hereditary and other movies. I think she's become a major actress. I think she get Oscar nominated, frankly. There are people who said that she should have been Oscar nominated for Hereditary and didn't. And from what I've seen Hereditary, I agree.
Yeah, she's done a lot of stuff lately. She was in Knives Out recently.
Yeah.
And she was in Del Toro's remake of Nightmare Alley.
Like I said,
so she's been in a lot of stuff.
She's a major actress.
She's had a bit of a career renaissance in some ways in the past few years.
Yeah. And there are others that people those are some that I didn't include. Well, I included Toni Collette in my article, but those were some that I didn't include in my piece. So not a lot of big celebrities, big stars that I met in regards to covering film festivals, but I've met a few. So I thought I'd get that out of the way at some point, because I figured people want to know who you met and who haven't you met. And people can take a look at that.
I was going to say, the thing is, I would rather meet some of the people you named than, like a Brad Pitt anyways, because with a Roger Corman, you can pick his brain because he's sort of Corman was like an operator, man. Like this dude, he had a system set up, and regardless of what you thought of the quality of his movies, and I do think he's made some good movies. You watch those Edgar Allan Poe movies he made, the sets on those are so lavish and incredible for the budgets he's working on. But also, he was, in terms of being a filmmaker and a producer of film, I mean, he knew how to make money, and you got to respect the hustle. And I would love to pick someone's brain like that, even more so than like some of the people that are like more household names, if you will.
And that's why I like talking to actors in general, but I also like talking to filmmakers, because the old part of me that I mentioned before that learned filmmaking as a kid still had all the technical stuff in my mind, the knowledge, the basic stuff. Like I knew how to storyboard. I learned to storyboard when I was a kid, learning about filmmaking, and a little about editing, not much, but a little about editing. So you got to understand that I think you have a point there. I mean, I'd be glad to meet Brad Pitt, so I'll just say that.
I'm not saying I wouldn't want to meet Brad Pitt. I'm just saying,
I'm more than happy to meet someone like Brad Pitt, who's more interesting to me because he's somebody who went from being an extra to being an actor and then a star. And that's a more interesting climb to me than someone like Bruce Campbell, who was very hands-on. Bruce was involved in the business when he was doing Evil Dead and Crime Wave and a lot of these movies. He wasn't just an actor. He was involved with Sam Raimi, his pal. He wasn't just an actor. This is a guy who's involved in all these aspects. So when you talk about someone like Corman, that's another guy I would advise people take a look at is Bruce Campbell. That's a guy who knows a lot about the business because he was involved in all these aspects of the business. It wasn't just an actor who showed up to the set on Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2.
I mean, I would say that about everyone that was in the sort of Sam Raimi circle. So there's Bruce. Scott Spiegel was a very interesting person that made his own films, but also worked with Sam Raimi. Ted Raimi, Sam's brother, is also someone that's been involved in a lot of stuff. I guess what I meant, it's not that I wouldn't want to meet someone like a Brad Pitt, but I feel like with like the A-list of the A-list, they're so protected, that in interviews, I feel like what they're going to say, and there's certain things they're not going to say. Whereas I feel like with Corman, you can get some candid stuff out of him that you wouldn't get out of other people.
Well, I never interviewed Corman. I just met him. I just had a conversation. It's something I prefer. I remember meeting.
But conversations can be more candid than interviews. That's true. Right. Yeah.
I remember meeting actor Cliff Curtis. I think we did an interview, but we also had conversation. Cliff Curtis has been in a number of movies. Once Were Warriors, The Insider, and a number. I think he was in The Island of Dr. Moreau. Was he in The Island of Dr. Moreau? I don't think he was in that one. But he's been in a number of movies. And I remember having a conversation with him.
He was in the latest Avatar movie a while back.
Oh, he was? Okay.
Yeah,
like I said, he's a guy who worked for a well-trained actor in terms of his background. Very well-trained actor. And it was a delight to talk to. Not just interview, but talking with him when we were in a van going to theater from the hotel. Just a delight to talk to. And that's the thing I enjoyed about covering film festivals, was talking to actors and filmmakers on a on just an everyday human level. And you're not interviewing. And I found, and so if I were to go and do film festivals again, which I'm considering and looking into, if there are any film festivals that are interested in having me cover it, even though I have a tiny little Substack now, they can contact me. So, yeah. So I just wanted to get that part in because I know people will inevitably go, well, who have you met, and so forth.
How can my listeners keep up with your work? Give out the Substack one more time, and we'll leave it at that.
My new Substack is a film Substack. My new film Substack is called Final Cut. And you can find the Final Cut newsletter at allanier.substack.com. That's ALLANIER.substack.com. So please visit, read, and subscribe to Final Cut at allanier.substack.com. And there are a couple of pieces there already, one on Quentin Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs and another on my covering film festivals, which has some photos. In fact, there's also another companion aspect called the Film Festival Photo Album, which are some photos of me at film festivals. So very interesting. You can also check me out on Instagram at Writer Al Lanier. I don't know if that's at Writer Al Lanier, but Writer Al Lanier on Instagram. And I've kind of been trying to make that, change that over. You know, before I was thinking of, when the pandemic came along, I was going to be taking photos as a hobby. So I would go to Comic-Cons and, you know, take photos of cosplayers to kill time in between events and so forth. And so I decided, okay, I'll do that. Then the pandemic got in the way. So I'm just kind of actually taking all my old photos that I did when I was covering certain things, TV shows. I was visited a couple TV shows here in Hawaii when they were on production, and movies like film festival stuff, and putting it up there. I have stuff about Baywatch because I visited Baywatch both seasons when they were in Hawaii. So there's some photos from Baywatch up there. So that's Writer Al Lanier at Substack.
Thank you again, Albert Lanier, for coming on Parallax Views.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Albert Lanier, and that you'll consider checking out his Substack, The Final Cut. That's linked to in the episode description. As always, if you appreciate the work here I do at Parallax Views, I really, 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 really need your support right now. Advertising situation is up in the air, and I just really need your support on Patreon. So patreon.com/parallaxviews. If you can send me, a monthly donation, even if just $1, that would really help me out. One more time, patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.